But it's sexier, right? It's easier to sell.
Yeah, all the citizens want it.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm not sure, is this on? Okay, welcome everyone to this event on green procurement. We're very excited for this. This is kind of a conclusion of a one-year project that involved a lot of research from our side here at Bruegel. It was funded by the ECF and on this very important topic. I mean, procurement is like something that sounds always very technical, but it's actually a 2 trillion market in the EU, and it's one of the big levers that are there to affect climate change but that thus far have not been used as much to the full extent as they could be. So I'm very excited here to have this event, also with this wonderful panel here, and discuss what can be done there. Before we start with presenting the work that came out of this big project, I want to first quickly introduce the panel that I have here. So to my left is Anna Cavazzini. She is a member of the Parliament, of the European Parliament for the Green Party. She's the chair of the Committee for the Internal Market and Consumer Protection. And of course, with that also very deeply involved in this whole procurement agenda and what it means for Europe. Then we have our own Francesco Nicoli. He's a non-resident fellow at Bruegel and a professor at the Turin University in the Polytechnic at Turin. And he has written together with Sophie Lappe, one of our research assistants, this study that we present today. Then we have on the other side, we have Oliver Salthoft. I hope I pronounced that fine. He's a senior associate at the European Climate Foundation who very generously supported this work. And he works in industry innovation there. And lastly, but not least, we have Marta Toporek, who is a legal and policy officer for strategic procurement at the European Commission, and they are responsible for innovation, green and social. And I hope she can tell us a little bit about what the Commission's plan are on this agenda. With that, no further ado, I want to give the floor to Francesco to present his study.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So first off, again, also from my side, welcome everyone. So today we are presenting a paper which results from more than 1 year of work, which was kindly and generously supported by the European Climate Foundation. And here we are exploring in the paper not just what public procurement can achieve, the moment we include green criteria, but also what are the tensions behind it, because we felt that in order to really improve the impact that public procurement policies can have on European strategies for the next decades, we have to take into account the trade-offs and possible issues that emerge when we compare decarbonisation with other policies. So, of course, public procurement is strategic for the European Union. We're not going into the details. In the paper, you will find quite a bit of background information on that. It accounts for 14% of European GDP. It accounts for about 10% of European emissions. And therefore, decarbonizing public procurement can have a huge impact on the aggregate stance in terms of emissions of the European Union. However, it also produces trade-offs with trade, especially with third parties, with third countries, but also with the fiscal and budgetary stability of many member states, because green technology for now is not particularly cheap. So in this study, we did quite a bit of steps in order to understand whether comprehensive greening of public procurement is feasible. We also conducted a dedicated survey to understand what European citizens wanted. And we found out that about 55% of people surveyed in 5 member states plus the UK are quite strongly in favor, even of paying higher prices for public procurement, if it comes down to it, if this comes with a substantial effort in greening and decarbonizing the economy. So 55% is a huge number when it comes to public support. Nonetheless, we also need to understand how these set of policies interacts with trade. The Commission is probably mindful of the fact that not only we need to decarbonize, but also public support, as I showed, is quite high. Data are from April this year, so relatively recent. Marta probably will tell us much more about the agenda later, but the Commission has put forward several different legislative packages which in the next few years will reshape the way green public procurement is done in Europe. However, these different actions are not in the vacuum, right? We are facing a series of global challenges, from security to trade, and therefore, whichever action we take on a sector which is so critical as public procurement is deemed to have ripple effects throughout the broader strategies the European Union has to put forward to address various challenges. We formalize these as a trilemma. Okay, because trilemmas help us understanding the trade-offs. And of course, decarbonisation is one of the key long-term strategic objectives of the European Union. But it's not the only one. The European Union is also built on the idea of maintaining fiscal and price stability. It's the second element of the trilemma there. And finally, the changing geopolitics we're living in implies that we have to think what the European Union can do on its own legs for the next decades. We need to achieve, or many of us want to achieve, a degree of strategic autonomy. We argue that these three things are hard to keep together, especially because right now supply chains for green products remain underdeveloped in Europe, but very cheap alternatives exist outside. Let's face it, the majority of green technology is currently imported from China. And it's imported from China, not because we do not have the same technology, but because it's substantially cheaper to import it from China. We can discuss why. Maybe it's a matter of access to raw materials, maybe it's a matter of scale, but it is cheaper. So if we want to achieve strategic autonomy, these would come at the cost of additional budgetary effort to be done in order to bring back to Europe the supply chains. On the other side, so this is one combination of the trilemma. On the other side, we can think of getting rid of the strategic autonomy, at least on green technologies, continue to decarbonize the public sector, and therefore choose to follow the idea of pursuing green public procurement without any geopolitical conditions. And finally, we can also just think that maybe we should get rid of this entire agenda of greening the public sector, at least greening public procurement. We can continue to pursue strategic autonomy and budgetary stability at the same time without pursuing decarbonization of public procurement. These are hard trade-offs. It's not easy to find a balance between these different objectives. In the paper, we go through several, actually quite hard to reach data sets, I would say, to understand how exactly the EU fares on each of these conditions. And deep down, though, we think that public procurement remains a strong tool that can help decarbonization. So how can we achieve decarbonization via public procurement? Be mindful of the challenges of the trilemma I just presented you. Well, we need to think throughout the different types of public procurement how to find the exact combination that minimizes the trade-offs we just discussed. We see public procurement as fundamentally, or the greening of public procurement taking place either at the company level or at the product level, and it can affect the market at the eligibility staging or awarding stage. In the paper, we discuss the positive and negative impacts of each of these possible combinations. In general, our policy recommendations aim at finding the, let's say, the combination of these different alternatives in greening public procurement that minimize the trade-offs. And in particular, we argue that we need to pursue 4 different steps. The Commission, I think, is already quite mindful of these steps, but we also believe more work needs to be done. First off, I think, and we think, that there needs to be a very strong consistency with a broader policy framework that the European Union is pushing forward, not just for decarbonizing, but also for strategic autonomy. So first off, whichever action is taken needs to avoid replicating and avoid damaging the credibility of existing tools such as ETS or CBAM. In the paper, we discuss extensively why public procurement reform, if done badly, can harm the credibility of both these instruments. Second, we think that the introduction of green public procurement criteria should not be done in a way that disrupts the locally available supply, because a key driver of prices in public procurement is that in specific places, at the end is cities, is public administrations that are responsible for public procurement, they do not have the entire EU market available. They have the local suppliers most of the time. And if you push some of them out because of very stringent criteria, you risk fundamentally creating oligopolies or even monopolies. For this reason, it's probably better to have norms that enter at a work stage rather than at the eligibility stage. And it's better to find order mechanisms to allow companies to be more competitive by reducing administrative burdens that they will face. Third, I mean, at Bruegel you will hear this continuously, but this time we really believe it, we need to leverage the scale of the single market. We need to leverage the scale of the single market. Typically through standardizing platforms that make sure that whichever criteria it's implemented in one country is recognized in different countries. So shared cross-border rule books or common rules via regulations rather than directives can very strongly help in increasing the portability of norms and therefore increasing the capacity of companies of competing cross-border, which is key to achieve point 2, to make sure that at the end, on the territory, supply is available. And finally, I mean, we have been working on this at Bruegel as well. We have to keep in mind that joint procurement, which is a new or by now 5 years old approach to dealing with EU public goods, is taken seriously also when it comes to green procurement, because scale matters. The formation of lead markets is important, but the EU, by putting together or coordinating major purchases, can really help in creating the scale that companies need to pay for the infrastructure and for the investment needed to relocate supply chains in Europe. So in the paper, you will find lots of details on these different policy recommendations I just outlined. So we believe that green public procurement can be extremely helpful, but needs to be done in ways that the price and trade effects are contained, and we hope of having offered good suggestions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think that's a great jump-off point for this discussion. I want to give the floor next to Anna. You at the European Parliament have discussed this, of course, probably in great detail. You've talked to many members of different states, but also for companies. How do you think about this the different trade-offs that are there, especially in this dust trilemma? Where do you fall there, and where do you think the priorities should be?
Thank you so much for the invitation and also for putting on this important study. I think it is really crucial that in this moment of time where the Parliament basically has been also negotiating our resolution on the future of public procurement, where the Commission is preparing the laws, and of course our resolution is informing the Commission proposal, that you come in as a think tank with a little bit bigger bird eye analysis and also help our work. So thanks for that. It's really, really important. Because what I noticed also in the discussions with stakeholders when we prepared the work in the Parliament, that I think everyone agrees now that we need more strategic procurement. I think everyone, really, from left to right, from different companies whatsoever. And I think this is, of course, a good thing, because I would say 10 years ago or something, it was not the case. Or I even remember in the first term, when I was elected, basically last term, it was, of course, able to put some of more strategic procurement rules in sectoral legislation, but we never had also majorities in the Parliament to have a really more strategic approach to reopen the public procurement directives. And now I think, yeah, with the geopolitical tensions, with also the very, very clear analysis that we need to foster also demand in the internal market for our Green Deal products, but also in general for European companies and European products in this fierce worldwide competition. I think all of that has led to the fact that we need more strategic procurement. Okay, but well, everyone agree here, the devil is in the details. So I think I'm very, very happy that you also put down the dilemma, but also propose some solutions. And yeah, probably I don't envy so much the Commission that has to come with a very, very concrete technical proposals at the end, also how to achieve it. But bottom line, I can say that we in the European Parliament, and you know it, also managed to clearly say that we need a shift, that we need to go away from the lowest price criteria, that we need to use public procurement as a tool to fulfill the Green Deal goals, but also to fulfill autonomy, sovereignty goals, basically, with European preferences. I hear this dilemma between decarbonisation and procurement and the price quite often, but there, of course, our answer would always be it is important to not look at the actual price, but at the life cycle cost, and I think this can always be, of course, the main argument. When it comes to competition with China, I think also overall the picture is that we have different trade instruments and defense instruments at place and should probably also strengthen them, because it's not only in procurement, but it's also just as a normal consumer. Okay, if the electric car from China is always half the price, then of course I buy the electric car from China, and for decarbonization purpose it's cool that more Europeans buy small e-cars, but of course it's not very good for our car industry. So in also other sectors we have this dilemma, and for me the answer is really to make use of trade defense instruments when there is unfair competition from let's say Chinese companies, to also make sure that and we have the international procurement instrument, we have also solutions when there is really an unfair outbidding in the calls, to basically then just also cancel bids from the third countries. And I think we should make use of that also more fiercely. But then secondly, of course, we need, and this is probably now my final remarks, we need to adapt the European rules to make it possible that we overcome these dilemmata, and that public authorities in the European Union really procure greener and procure more socially. And I'm also very much looking forward to see what the Commission is actually proposing. But again, I think our mandate from the European Parliament that we voted on 2 weeks ago, after very also difficult discussions, because again, the devil is in the detail, that the Commission, we expect from the Commission to propose an ambitious reform.
If I may push you on one point, so do I understand you correctly that you would kind of delineate between the strategic side, which you would say is more like a trade instrument story about basically using a foreign subsidy instrument for procurement, and then the green side where you would rather go through the actual current procurement criteria? Is that a right way of framing your position?
Yeah, I would say there's different instruments to be applied to a problem that is bigger than only procurement when it comes to China. This is basically my point. Yeah.
Thank you. Then let's give the floor to Marta, who will present a little bit of what's on the work agenda of the European Commission and how you plan to solve all these different goals that need to be reconciled.
That's a 100 euros, or that's question that we are trying to solve. As Anna said, it's not easy. We are trying to do something ambitious. As you probably know, we started with the evaluation because we also had ECHA report. We had council saying, assess what's going on public procurement. So this is what we started with. And this evaluation should be out very soon. So I mean, we are trying to have it in October. It's always difficult to commit to dates. So I'm saying October with precaution, but normally that's the plan. And that means that we start working on the impact assessment, and then the revision will come later. But as you will see in the evaluation report, and probably you could see that already in questions in public consultation, strategic public procurement, so environmental, social, and innovation is important part of our work. So I don't know how things will be presented in impact assessment, but we are looking first at them separately to build something together. So for us, it is important. It's difficult to say now in which direction we will go and what options we will assess. We see that things are happening about green public procurement in member states, but I'm happy also to see that some of problems we see are also coming in this report, because, for example, data. That's a big problem, and that's actually something that makes it even difficult to assess where we are with public procurement. The other thing you mentioned was you mentioned also complexity or simplification, saying our rules may be difficult. May become more complicated, but simplification is at the core of it. So I don't know what we will end up at the end, but this is something we are looking at. And then you mentioned also internal market, and I think this is also important thing, because you have front runners in the EU, and you have countries who actually are still asking what green public procurement is, how to define it. What to do with that, and not telling about what I said at the beginning about data gathering. So this is also an important thing. And evaluations you can see on the Commission website. Evaluation was focused on the 3 public procurement directives from 2014. Now, what the revision will be about, it might be wider. Because we also got a mandate to look at, I don't remember the exact wording, but like streamline sectoral provisions, because they are super useful and we value them. We get feedback from contracting authorities or from member states that because they are so fragmented, it's difficult for them to implement them. So I think it's important thing that what is adopted is then implemented, because it's a super important thing. And this, the core of your study. These different objectives and how to put them together, and how to make sure we buy EU, but EU made, and we buy green, and we respect social conditions. That will be, I think it will be a very difficult thing. I hope we will come with something, something good, although not everybody will be happy probably, because it never happens. But we are thinking of that. So I understand that your study does not really give solutions, because you have this triangle. And there are lots of policy areas. So if you look at sectoral legislation, we are talking about, if we talk about EU acts, including public procurement, we talk about around 60 acts. So it's a very wide picture. Yes, maybe, I stop here.
Thank you. If I may ask one follow-up question on this as well. We've seen in this mandate, I think one of the big themes is deregulation, and we've seen that at least the assessment apparently at the political level at the European Commission was that especially green legislation in the last mandate, in the last legislative cycle, was basically going too quick, and now we're running back. We're taking a step back. We were 2 steps forward and 1 step back. What's the approach to this? Is basically now the idea again to have like a big shot and then we roll it back later, or is it actually going to be more cautious and actually not go as far and then revise later upside? So where would you put the level of ambition at the Commission, given the kind of debate there is about over-regulation or whatever you want to call it?
Well, we definitely don't want to deregulate. You will judge when you see things at the end, but this is not what we want to do. We obviously aim at high ambition, but again, you will see what you get in the end. We discussed it with some stakeholders who are saying, well, simplification is often, perceived as deregulation, while at least in this discussion that I'm referring to, people were saying, well, simplification can be also putting more detail on certain things, because, why do we have such fragmented landscape on green public procurement? I mean, in some countries you have really mandatory requirements for a big number of products, but then the company will go to the other country and will have requirements on other products. So, all that to conclude is that we are not, no, our ambition is not to deregulate, ambition is to simplify, but, simplify also clarify certain things. Now I cannot say what we will come up at the end with, because nobody knows, actually.
Thank you. Before I go to Oliver, just a reminder for our audience, as always, we will open the floor to the audience at the end of this discussion. And this time there will be, as always, the opportunity for those that joined from online to ask questions using Slido. So you have to go to slide.do, and the hashtag for this session is green. With that, I want to go to Oliver. So European Climate Foundation has been pushing this subject for quite a while. And it's kind of a core part of the green agenda of decarbonizing the European economy. How satisfied are you with what you heard so far in the session? Do you think we're in a good track?
I was almost a little bit annoyed because all my points were mentioned by Marta, but I think that's a great start, and I do want to thank the Commission for having had such an open door process, such a very constructive dialogue, and I can tell that you're really taking in a lot of input and trying to deal with all these input to revising some policy frameworks that I think indeed it will be a tricky process, and I almost want to say I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, but nevertheless I do have some input for it, because indeed in the European Climate Foundation we are very much focused on the potential of utilizing procurement as a leverage naturally for the green transition, which is one of our focuses. We've zoomed a lot in on, of course, the revision of the Public Procurement Directive, which is super important, as well as the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act that's also on the table for the moment being. And our focus is the reason why we funded the establishment of some project groups, coalitions, if you will, one of them being led by the ISD. Do we have Lisbeth down there in the room? Yeah. We have ECOS that we've also teamed up with. Saw them somewhere down there. And indeed, then we funded this study by Bruegel. And indeed, it's great satisfaction that I've read this study, because it indeed underlines the importance of the subject and the potentials as well. I think I've seen many familiar faces down here in the audience. Many of them I've collaborated with here in Brussels for the past a couple of years, as we've worked on various policy frameworks together, and that being the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. We worked on the Eco-Design of Sustainable Products Regulation, the Construction Product Regulation, and the key attached to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what I think is so significant for the public procurement discussions and the development of policies is that the revision of Europe's public procurement policies is what's going to bind all these many policy frameworks, all this bureaucracy, if you will, together, and make sure that all the green denominators that we put into these policy frameworks, that they are actually utilized when awarding public contracts for taxpayers' money at the end. That we sustain investments, that's also what I heard Marcia say, investments into decarbonization, into innovation, and thereby also deliver on some of the political ambitions that we have for the European Union. So yeah, I think to be quite frank, it's one of the most important policy discussions we've had, and I think the Bruegel, you really managed to underline how important it is in this paper for many various reasons. If I should do a point strike to just some of them, indeed we have the geopolitical perspective. We've seen how important it is that we do reindustrialization of Europe, that we onshore European industries, and we need to give industries the best prerequisites to do that, and do that in a decarbonized and innovative form. We've seen that if we want to get there, then we basically want to move away from lowest price, is what I also heard Anna say, and instead move to rewarding, again, low carbon or innovation. And yet these initiatives that we basically want to see in the development of new public procurement policies for Europe, then of course also taps into some very, very complicated issues and questions that we have as for ensuring the European competitiveness, that of course we want green industries to be reimbursed for all their investments that they will have to make if they should rightfully decarbonize production, and we'll have that will also mean finding money for green premiums. That is absolutely inevitable. But of course, that also plays into all the discussions of Europe's competitiveness, exports, that we can't just expect products to spin out of control on their prices. We see that there's decreasing competition across our borders within the single market. We need to really make sure that our procurement policies are integrated to their fullest potential, to make sure that we then turn the tide and now instead create more competition on not just the price, but on how green our products is across the various borders of the European Union. The last thing I want to tap into is then the simplification agenda, which is indeed the big question mark, because how are all these things that we want to do basically going to fit with the agenda of simplification that we do have in the political sphere? I think automation and digitalization, and again, EU integration is going to be absolutely key, and I do hope that the Commission will come up with something on this, because otherwise it's not going to be a long-lasting solution to bet on procurement as a leverage for the things we want to achieve. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Oliver. We already have a lot of questions online, so it shows how important this topic is. But before we go to the audience, I still want to give everyone here the opportunity to react, and I start with Francesco. And maybe I can add one question here, apart from your reaction to what you heard from the fellow panelist, is a bit about the risks that are there with going from the kind of pure price criteria. I mean, one of the beauties of going only by price is that it leaves very little room for discretion for the awarding authority or awarding party, whereas basically once you go to quality criteria, this leaves a lot more room to kind of give specific procurements to political bodies and the like. So how do you think about these trade-off about graft and what can be done to prevent that from happening?
Thanks. So, yes, the issue of discretion is fundamental, I think, but at the same time, it is not impossible to quantify quality, especially when it comes to the impact on decarbonization and the impact on lifelong costing, for instance. So there are elements that can be ultimately brought together and compared with a simple key measure as simple pricing. So we can bring these things together in a updated version of pricing. I think to a large extent is already done. It needs to be systematized, and it needs to be assessed in ways that are similar across borders. I think the issue of differences in cross-border legislation at the end of the day is fundamental. And that's also important because when there are no bidders from different countries or not bidders from different regions within a country, there is nobody who will challenge the political decision maker if the person in charge is taking a decision which is driven by political utility. By expanding the market in itself, you also increase the number of actors which will act as a sort of self-enforcing watchdogs on what is going on. So I think it's fundamental that you have rules that allow the largest possible number of enterprises to compete, because this creates a self-enforcing dynamic. I have a question for the two, I would say, politicians in the room here. That is
implementing body.
The trilemma that we bring forward is something that is fundamentally a political question. Where is the priority? Is it on decarbonisation? Is it on geopolitics? Is it on price stability? And we cannot answer these in terms of policy advice or policy proposals as a think tank. It needs to come from the political guidance where you want to go on the trilemma. So that's what I would expect from you, actually.
I know. Francesco made my life easier, so he asked the question for me. Well, what's your reaction to this?
I mean, is it working? Yes, now it's working. I really like conceptualization and so on, but probably we should also not over-dramatize. I have the feeling you can reach all the three goals, and probably you cannot always 100% never procure from China. And there might be instances when then some products are cheaper from China. And for example, in renewable energy, I mean, you know it all, there's no solar panels anymore being produced in Europe. The last ones were actually in my constituency, and they went bankrupt because of the fierce competition. There might be instances where it's necessary to procure from China or from elsewhere, but there are other options where then in a product line B, not in renewables, it's possible. So I would say probably we should not emphasize the dilemma, although of course it's a great analysis, don't get me wrong. But I think we can, my feeling is we don't have to make an AB3 or 1 to 3, ABC 1 to 3 order and say we prefer this strategic objective over this one. I think we need to design the rules in a way that we can fulfill most of the three parts of the triangle. This would be my my answer. And again, probably very quickly coming back to the simplification question, in the parliament, I can tell you that whereas in a lot of other fields, this whole deregulation, I find it very interesting that you named it by the name, agenda, is highly controversial. But when we discussed it in the public procurement report, everyone agreed, because we are of the opinion it is also right now already very, very, very complicated. And all the local authorities you talk to, they say the same, even without green. And if we want to make it greener or more social, then it cannot get more complicated. This is 100% sure. So I think there needs to be smart solutions. But I think that's why I also liked some of your conclusions. And we also put some of them in our report. I think the local authorities, they need a very simple list or something from which they can procure. They don't want to make big assessments. They don't want to calculate it. They need labels. They need a list. They need something, and then they can procure from this list or something. So, and for me, that's also kind of, for the first time, a very positive simplification.
Before I go to Marta, I understand that you have to leave a bit early, so I'm not sure we will have time to come back to you. So I want to give you the opportunity to highlight for the procurement agenda a few things that you really would want the Commission to deliver. What are kind of for you the criteria for success that you would say if this comes out of the Commission, you will just sign it off from the Parliament and make the trialogue very easy? And what are the things where you say, this is a red line for us, we will pick a fight on this?
Yeah, probably it's a tiny little bit repetitive, but I can try to make a short list. And then indeed, I'm so sorry I have to take off and go to the Parliament because we have a shadows meeting in the US trade agreement, which is another funny, not so nice story, but okay. So one thing, you talked about the sectoral legislation that we have already in place. For me, it would be really important to build on them and not de-build them for the sake of harmonization. You know what I mean? Because I mean, this was, I would say, a success story of last term. I get that the fragmentation is annoying, but at least in some of the sectoral legislation, we got progress. And so for me, it's important to not roll back the progress. Again, combine simplification with clearer rules, and all of you are also in contact with local authorities. For us, the main feedback we got is that they want to procure greener, but they fear legal uncertainty, and they fear that then, if they don't use the lowest price, they will get sued. And I think having like clear rules that give legal certainty to local authorities who want to procure greener is definitely another priority. Yeah, and I think the big elephant in the room that we didn't touch upon so much today is still the European preferences, or the famous Buy European. And there, of course, the big question is also how to really operationalize it. But whereas, for example, even whatever the EPP 1 year ago was completely against it, now they also signed on to the idea in our report. So there is, I would say, now a really broad support also in the European Parliament for that. But again, there the devil will be in the detail, which percentage, with which areas, how to really operationalize it. But I can just strongly say it again that really the whole Parliament signed onto this demand, so it has to be also in the proposed reform.
Thank you very much for taking the time. Then I will give the floor to Marta and give her the opportunity to respond and also to add what she once said.
So I can say that our starting point now, where we are, is to think what is missing and what is not working. And if we continue in this direction, we will really get something potentially very good. Because, I mean, different elements. So yes, I agree, sectoral legislation, I mean, public procurement in sectoral legislation is a step forward. For the time being, in a way, in some cases we have sectoral legislation, but we don't have yet the rules, actually. So we don't know how it would work. It's just our position, if on doing something on that, is just to simplify life of contracting authorities. Because this is the same thing as the rules. We get the same feedback. Rules are complicated. And sometimes things are not clear because, for example, labels, I particularly looked into labels recently. They can be a very, very useful instrument, but contracting authorities are afraid of using them because they will have to look at the equivalent, they don't have resources, it's complicated. In addition, I must say some of these things, I mean, we will see what we manage to solve. But some of these things are also on implementation, because when we talk about these labels and complexity and difficulties of contracting authorities, it's also resources that are needed to assess all these very technical elements. So that's it. I also note point on digitalization. It's something, I mean, again, we are aware of. This is something we see it also as opportunity for, this reform. And also something, I don't know, at some point of the discussion, maybe you, Olivier, said something about consultations. It's just putting, publicity on what the Commission is doing. But it was a lot of work for us. We really tried to consult not only through regular open public consultation, through which surprise, surprise, we went through lots of these documents ourselves. We're all reading these documents. And these were like huge numbers. And many of these contributions were also forward-looking. So evaluation was an exercise backwards looking. We already got quite a lot of ideas for the future. But also we consulted very widely. We are trying to have targeted meetings to gather stakeholders with similar profile together. We had lots of bilateral meetings when we were asked for them. So I hope we got really quite a lot of views on what's working and what's not working. And I hope that, we will address at least part of them in the revision. Sometimes it's difficult because I've heard from someone, well, we are happy with mandatory criteria. And then the next meeting at which I attended, I've heard no mandatory criteria. So, you know, maybe it's difficult to make everybody happy. But everybody, I think, who comes to us, they are coming with practical problems, things faced on the ground. So, and obviously you will sometimes have different views when you come from the industry and when you come from the public authority. So, I mean, these are wide reactions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anna has to leave now, but we still have the Q&A. But before we go there, I will give the floor to Oliver to also react, and maybe he can say something about what he would make the criteria for success or failure of this particular reform.
Oh, that's a good question. I think again, all the parameters that we discussed previously. How do we basically make sure that we increasingly reward investments in decarbonization is obviously one of our focuses in the European Climate Foundation. The innovation, I very much agree with what Anna was saying, that when we look at the Trilemma that Bruegel has presented here, I personally don't see a need to do a prioritization with these three either. I think it's possible to deliver on all three of them, but we really need to go up in the helicopter, do I dare to say drone perspective, and really take all these factors into account, because I think it's possible to really foster and incentivize decarbonization and ensuring our autonomy as well as our competitiveness if we do it in the right way. But it will require that we utilize the legislation that we've already put in place for the various sectors, but that we also that we diminish some of these barriers indeed that we discussed or that I heard from our two ladies here, with our procurement managers that are so afraid of awarding by anything else, by the lowest price, because basically they're afraid of lawsuits. And I heard the same thing also when speaking to procurement managers about labels, afraid of awarding contracts by labels because, it could be interpreted as unfair competition. So if we can diminish all these barriers and increase competition on the green denominator of our products and services, then I think we'll basically both ensure European autonomy, will keep the inflation low, and will incentivize the decarbonization of our industries.
Thank you. With that, I will open the floor. I don't know if we already have a number of questions here. Maybe we start with the gentleman on the right. We go through.
Check. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, just a quick reference.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Carlos Escrivá. I have been a procurement practitioner with international organizations for more than 10 years. On this comment, I would just like to bring to the fore that we seem to have a little bit of a scope creep, and I will explain. I understand this is the procurement debate, and it is very important to influence it. But one thing is decarbonizing through the public sector, and another thing is decarbonizing through procurement rules. Public procurement is a set of rules that we have to make things fair, transparent, and provide value for money. Actually, with the 2014 directive, you could already be decarbonizing if your procurement managers and teams have been trained. And by the way, I think the best thing the Commission did for that one was the guidance. It's fantastic.
Could you please ask your question?
Okay, sorry. To me, wouldn't it be okay? If you put the trilemma in the procurement, you are complicating the regulation. The trilemma is a strategic question that should be answered in the strategic policy, in internal market policy, and in the regulations and so on. The procurement rules do not need to deal with the trilemma.
So a plea not to worry about the trilemma, I understand. We had a question here from a gentleman in the second row. Could you please? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Gerhard Huemer from the European SME Association, SME United, and I'm dealing there with public procurement since 25 years. I want to touch on two topics. First thing is, if you really want to take it serious with simplification, and simplification is important to motivate the thousands of small procurement agencies to go in the direction of green procurement, then I really would avoid to put the rules for greening into the public procurement directive itself. I see much more advantages, and I hope there is a support from the politician side if you keep it in this sector, in the Circular Economy Act, in the Net Zero Industrial Act, etc., which gives guidance or even obligations to the procurer what to procure. But don't do it what to procure. If you do it with the Public Procurement Directive, you will fail because it becomes even more complex at the moment. The second point is the dilemma you have said about taking the eligibility criteria versus the criteria for making the decision in the end. For us, it's even more important to say, keep it on the product level, services level, etc. Because if you decide only certain types of companies are allowed to apply, then you reduce competition, you create monopolistic structures, etc., etc. Every company which fulfills the legal requirements to be active on the market should be allowed to apply. But, of course, he has to offer a product which is in line with the green requirements of the concrete tender. And here this is...
Thank you.
What do you think about this? Keep it on the product requirements, yeah? Project-related and not company-related. This is very dangerous for our dynamic of the economy.
Thank you. A plea for a product-related. We have one more question, I think, from the gentleman behind. Please.
Thank you very much, Morten Jung from the Danish Chamber of Commerce, and we just found a new friend. We totally agree with everything you said. So therefore, what we say in Denmark is we say tools, not rules, because we do not need to make major changes to the procurement directives. We need to make it more flexible in terms of how can you change during the tender period and afterwards in the contracts. That's what we need. We don't need any political rules put into the directives. We can have them in the sectoral legislation, and then afterwards we can tell you how we have actually thought of a model for using the CPV codes as a guidance to the sectoral legislation. But that's very technical. We'll take it afterwards. But the question is, how will you work with the tools in order to actually make the harmonization between all the countries so we increase the competition? But that's the main thing. How can we actually have more bids going cross-border? Because that's what the ECA said in the original report. There is a major lack of competition on bidders between the countries in EU. So that's the question for you.
Thank you. Before I open to the floor, I want to just highlight a few questions we got online. So there's a question about social responsible public procurement. So basically, there was, I think this is a little bit a child of the Inflation Reduction Act, where basically some procurement projects will link to social labor unionization requirements and so on. There's a question about planning. I'm not sure I understand this question. So, I mean, you see the questions here online. We had a lot more. Maybe each of you can pick one or two from the comments we got from the floor, and maybe also one or two of them questions we have here online. I don't know. Let's start with Francesco.
Yeah. So I think I will start from the second question. Which type of policies we investigate? Actually, in the paper, we try to see the advantages and disadvantages of all 4 options. So product and company criteria and award versus eligibility. Also from Oliver before, I heard that you prefer eligibility criteria, so excluding products. So least were, okay, so maybe I misunderstood what you meant. We think that award criteria are probably the way to go, because if you have award level criteria, you first give a little bit of leeway to the procuring authorities to balance things out. And second, you're not excluding ex ante companies from competing. So you maintain a pressure from the market to keep prices down. You don't give a free check to those who do green public procurement to raise the prices as much as they want because they have a protected market. Since you are balancing the green element versus the price element that or the competitiveness element that others might have, an award criterion keeps the oligopoly in check, if you want. So we prefer the award side. When it comes to the company versus product, in our analysis, the key point is really whether the product level requirement is enough to create the so-called lead markets. Because if you do a company level requirement and the companies is active in many different markets, the legislation is not helping to create lead markets, which is one fundamental strategic objective. There are other pros and cons that we discuss in the paper, but probably award level criteria and the product level seems to be the best.
Thank you. Marta, I think a lot of points for you. Please feel free to pick and choose a little bit. We unfortunately we're a bit limited in time.
It will be a little bit choosing things, as you said. Sorry. Okay. I don't really completely understand the question on socially responsible public procurement, but I want to say that as much as, because here we discuss green public procurement, we have similar discussions in the framework of impact assessment on socially responsible public procurement and innovation in public procurement of innovation. So, I mean, they may appear all the subjects all together in impact assessment. I mean, it's possible because you have to follow a certain structure, but we consider all of them separately to really get to the core of the problem. Now, there is an interesting question about a compliance tool. Wouldn't it be more efficient to mandate green output outcome in the planning and the budget? I mean, we are also thinking about, things about outside of like core procedure. Whether this will be where we will end up, I can't say, but we are very, very much aware of that. We had, for example, discussions on that in the context of circularity. When do we consider things? Do we consider them during the procedure or earlier? You said something, eligibility, product level and company level. We hear that quite often. My only thing, and it's maybe not sufficient understanding, but it's also we have this obligation of the link to the subject matter currently, which I think has a value because you purchase, if you put some requirements, they must be relevant for what you are buying. So there must be a link. I don't know to which extent this requirements put on the company there would be sufficiently such a link. And then there is a question also because, for example, some requirements, some companies will have to have due diligence, etc., while it might be an issue for smaller players, so for SMEs. So, I mean, it's something we are thinking of, but there are pros and cons. I get the point also on the simplification and avoid rules on greening in the public procurement directives. I would be interested to learn from you about your ideas on how to manage the sectoral legislation. What we are thinking really, I mean, all our thoughts about sectoral legislation are coming from the fact that we fear that when they come from different pieces of legislation, or they are completely spread over, and of course Denmark is a front runner probably. We have countries in which it will not be managed properly at national level, and then it can be a problem even of implementation. So we can have, it may appear that we have great rules at EU level that will not be even implemented. They will cause another problems, I don't know, again, simplification, but everything is open at this stage. So it's not that we will go in this or that direction. I mean, really at the moment we are still at the stage we are assessing all the possible options. So I think that would be super useful.
Thank you. Before we go to Oliver for the last intervention, Francesco had a quick point you wanted to make.
Just a small clarification on what I said. Just a small clarification on what I said before, that the combination of award criteria and product level, it is very powerful, but it's also extremely complex. It's the least simplifying possible combination. So I think if that's a road that we take, we need to be aware that it is associated with an increment in administrative burden. Probably looking at companies might simplify.
Thank you. Oliver, the last word is yours.
I wanted to pick up on two comments or questions, and I very much agree with the last two comments that were said, both when it comes to what should be put in the revised public procurement directive. Personally, when we look at it, we also see it the same way. We don't need to define green in the public procurement directive. Every definition of green or various parameters, whether it comes to climate, use of natural resources, etc., those definitions already, or should we say the calculation assessments already exist in all these various policy frameworks that I started out with mentioning. And then we also had the philosophy of tools instead of rules, and I very much support that. That's also why I said automation or digitalization. I think if we really want to incentivize decarbonisation and amplify competition across the single market borders, then we need systems, a common procurement system that can say, okay, it's rarely the case, but are you procuring steel? Well, you're procuring steel with an X CO2 footprint compared to what's available in another country within the European borders. That would be a tool that I could see would be very much useful, both for the sake of benchmarking on how green our authorities are actually procuring, but again also to stimulate the industry's incentive in decarbonizing production. I think we really have to be, you always have to be smart when you make legislation, and nevertheless, I think this is one of the pieces where we need to go from looking into writing big resolutions, but instead thinking of tools and solutions. I think that'll be my final word on this.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. I mean, I think we have material for another hour of discussion, and I'm sure we will have many more discussions like this once we actually have the piece of legislation on the table. I want to thank everyone for the excellent panel for this discussion, but also for all the comments we got from the audience, and for everyone for being here. I hope it was useful, and sorry for the timekeeping. It was a pleasure. Thank you.